Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razan Pereira. A day after the World Court ordered Pakistan to review the death penalty to Kulbhushan Jadhav, India on Thursday asked Pakistan to release the former Navy officer forthwith and vowed to vigorously continue efforts to bring him back. Foreign Minister S Jaishankar, in a statement in both houses of parliament, said the verdict was not only a vindication for India, but all those who believe in the rule of law. 49-year-old Kulbhushan Jadhav was arrested by Pakistan in March 2016 and accused of espionage, a charge India has rubbished. A year later, he was sentenced to death by a Pakistani military court. The International Court of Justice on Wednesday ruled that Pakistan must review the death sentence of the retired Navy officer. The World Court also directed Pakistan to allow the Indian citizen consular access. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the verdict of the International Court of Justice. Joining me on the program today are K.V. Prasad, Senior Associate Editor of The Tribune, Ashok Sajanhar, former Ambassador, Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation. I am also now joined by India's lead counsel at the ICJ, Harish Salve. Mr. Salve, welcome and thank you for joining me on the program. First, let's try and understand, how did India win the legal battle? What worked in our favor?
Well, I start by placing on record the enormous work done by the people from the Ministry of External Affairs and other members of my team, my junior Chetna Rai, Arundhati Kelkar. Everybody put in a huge effort to put together the pleadings which we filed, the legal documents we filed, and the submissions we made in the ICJ. And quite simply, our case was based on the substantial correspondence which ensued between India and Pakistan, in which Pakistan continued to unabashedly refuse consular access. That's all that we needed, apart from the legal literature we placed before the court.
Okay. Now, the court has also observed that, there has to be an effective review of Jadhav's sentence. What would constitute an effective review?
This is a phrase which is different from review as we understand it in our domestic courts. This is called effective review and reconsideration. And since much is being made of the fact that the judgment was not formally annulled, I need to clarify this. An effective review and reconsideration beginning from giving consular access are helping Jadhav in preparing his defense, which must mean they have to disclose the charges, the evidence, which up till now they have been absolutely opaque about. And then we will go and the circumstances in which his confession was extracted by the military. And then on that basis, a defense will be prepared, and whichever forum has to hear this, has to hear it completely and fully so that Jadhav has a right to place his defense. So virtually it is, for all practical purposes, a fresh trial. Now there is an interesting development. I get this from the material available from credible websites like the Commission on Juris, that the constitutional amendment which created military courts for trying civilians has lapsed in Pakistan and they have not been able to reenact it. As we speak, military courts cannot try civilians. Now, will Jadhav's case go back to the old military court is something which is not clear. Secondly, if it was to go back to the military court, would that be an effective review and reconsideration? Because the military court rules do not countenance this kind of a procedure by which outsiders are allowed to come in and assist in defending, as the consular access would mean. So that is why the International Court of Justice ended by saying that Pakistan must take all measures as are necessary, including legislative measures. So if they have to create a law to facilitate this process, so be it. That's the nature of the international obligation cast on Pakistan.
Right.
Yes, they have not been asked to return Jadhav as yet, because there is still, Jadhav is yet to establish his innocence. But his innocence has to be established not the way it was done in a kangaroo court, but properly in a proceeding where he has full access to legal representation of his choice, and in a proper manner where the presentation of his defense will be made assisted by India's consulate.
Absolutely. Now, before I let you go, Mr. Salve, there is another issue that I'd like you to address. Now, who's going to ensure that the ICJ's order is actually implemented?
Well, India is there, watchful. We will be involved at every step. And if at some point we feel that something is being done to evade the order, we can always go back to the court for further directions and clarifications. And if Pakistan brazenly denies the ICJ order, then there are other procedures under the UN Charter. Don't forget, the International Court of Justice is one of the bodies of the United Nations. And Pakistan, being a party to the Charter, is bound to obey. Now, if a state which is a party, I'm not saying Pakistan will do it. In fact, I'll be very surprised if they defy the ICJ. But if theoretically a state who's a party were to do it and behave like a rogue state, the international community knows how to deal with them.
Right. All right. Mr. Salve, thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on The Big Picture. Right. Let me now continue the discussion here with my panelists in the studio. Ambassador, I'd like to bring you in. So, your thoughts on what happened at The Hague?
I think it was a resounding victory, and all of us can be justifiably proud of what we've been able to get. If one recapitulates, it was, as you mentioned yourself, in March 2016, Kulbhushan Jadhav was arrested. We were informed, India was informed at the end of the month. So, that was a breach of law, breach of obligations and commitment by Pakistan that was committed. That is something that India had taken to the International Court of Justice. Then in April 2017, the death sentence was pronounced, and India lost no time in going to the International Court of Justice on the 8th of May 2017. Now, some people at that time had said that it is a risky move because India has not often got satisfaction whenever it has gone to the international bodies. And some people had also charged that maybe it is an internationalization of relations between India and Pakistan. But I think the government was very, very clear that this was only the limited case of Kulbhushan Jadhav and the denial of consular access under Article 36B of the Vienna Convention that we were going there. And number two, the urgency was because the sentence for his execution and that had been signed by the Chief of Army Staff. So that had to be negated very, very quickly, and we got satisfaction on that because the International Court of Justice on the 9th of May said that hold this in abeyance. And then as a result of our arguments then, as also at the beginning of this year, I think by and large we have been able to get satisfaction on 2 or 3 of the major aspects. Number one, that the execution has been stayed and the execution cannot be carried out till the full case has been heard all over again. Number two, consular access has to be provided. I think everyone knows that we asked for consular access 16 times and it was denied to us. And number three, as Mr. Salve was mentioning right now, effective review and reconsideration of the conviction and the sentence. So both of these, and the fact that under the Pakistan law, there is no outward representation or assistance that can be provided, then the International Court of Justice is including a change in the legislation, enacting appropriate legislation, which means that the military court also, if it goes to the military court. But I think the bar has been set very high for Pakistan. It is this is a case that is under the lens, under the purview of the International Court of Justice. And as External Affairs Minister has said today in the Parliament that India will vigorously pursue this case. So I think we need to vigorously pursue this case so that we get satisfaction on full annulment of the decision against Kulbhushan Jadhav and his safe and speedy return to India.
All right. Talking about vigorously pursuing this particular case, KV Prasad, are we getting set for another long and protracted battle with Pakistan on this issue?
Well, it certainly looks long and protracted as we speak now, because look at it. I mean, Pakistan wanted to speed up its end as it tried to do using the military court route, and now that India has one major victory at the International Court of Justice, so the pressure would obviously be different. And now, what Pakistan does, we'll have to wait and see what kind of things. But we don't know yet how they're going to move forward from it. But India is very clear. The commitment made by the Foreign Affairs, External Affairs Minister in Parliament today, that vigorously pursue the case. Obviously, you're going to prepare for the next round, and the next round would be one of the challenges. Of course, was to see, as I think Mr. Salve also put out, whether who is going to try this. The military court or a civil court. Now, he's made a legal point that the military court no longer has the jurisdiction on civilians and so on and so forth. But this is a technical thing that Pakistan will have to first look at it. But what I see a silver lining is the approach of Pakistan in the last few issues, because many steps that Pakistan has exhibited in terms of
Kartarpur Sahib,
of course, being one, Hafiz Saeed being another, and remember, Imran Khan is going to Pakistan. He's going to Washington, US, and everybody this morning saw the tweet from President Trump on the Hafiz Saeed, and so there are many issues. So I think we'll have to wait and see before we actually look as to which way the Pakistani and the military authorities would try to take it forward.
All right. So I'll just come to, can Pakistan really defy the ICJ in just a bit? But before that, talking about a victory, Harshvi Pant, whose victory is it anyway? Because if you look at the Pakistani newspapers, they are narrating a completely different tale altogether. I mean, they are calling it, major defeat for India, major victory for Pakistan, and so on and so forth. So what's happening there?
Well, I think the beauty of international law is that you can interpret it in many ways, and I think that's what perhaps Pakistan and especially the leadership of Pakistan is banking on, to make a case, especially to the domestic audience, that look, we have not lost all the face that it is being made out in the international circles, but clearly, if you look at it from the perspective of the loss of face, it's a significant loss of face in the court of world's public opinion, and I think that's what is important. You asked this question to Mr. Salve about who is going to implement it. I mean, ICJ's verdicts are binding, except they are not. That you don't have the enforcement mechanism to back it up, and that's what international law is, and that's the nature of international law. But what happens when you get a judgment where 15 out of 16 lawyers, best jurists in the world, make a case to Pakistan that look, the way you have functioned, the way you function domestically, is an abomination. Basically, that's what it says. Look at your domestic dysfunctionalities. Look at the way you have conducted a basic trial that your legislation in fact allows you to pursue. Look at the fact that you have signed on to a treaty which you are unable to adhere to. So clearly there are so many problems in the way Pakistani internal structures are formed and manifest themselves, that I think this particular problem emerges. And I think what India has been able to do successfully in this case is to showcase something that I think is important, which is that Pakistan is a rogue state. I mean, Mr. Salve was saying that, well, if it does not do that, then it is a rogue state. No, I think India has made a case that, look, if you look at the pattern of behavior, and I think that's what the important message coming out of this and coming out of other platforms. India has been to FATF. India has also made a case for Pakistan's diplomatic isolation, in which it has succeeded tremendously. So clearly, by and large, the strategy has worked politically in the sense of isolating Pakistan, and a lot of the things that Mr. Prasad was earlier talking, that Pakistan's approach is changing. It's changing because the pressure from multiple fronts is coming on Pakistan. So there is clearly now an expectation that because of that, because of the Pakistan's inability to get out of that isolation, Pakistan is taking certain steps as it goes to Washington to seek help from America, and that allows, I think, in some ways, this Pakistan and India to draw a line under the sand when it comes to this case. If Pakistan does take appropriate steps in Jadhav's case, then perhaps there can be an opening, a political opening for India and Pakistan to move forward. But again, for India, given we have how badly we have been treated in the past, we will wait and watch and see how this space unfolds.
So once bitten, twice shy is what you're suggesting, Ambassador. So since we are here, let's talk about this aspect as well. What has the history of implementation of ICJ verdicts really been? The issue between China and the Philippines comes to mind immediately, and the freedom of navigation in the seas there. So your thoughts on that?
My thoughts would be, I think International Court of Justice has a status somewhat different from the Permanent Court of Arbitration to which Philippines had taken China to. So there also the verdict that came in July 2016, it was completely rejecting all the claims of China, but China rubbished it. And, to respond to the question that you put as to what has been the historical experience, the experience has been that if the state that has been the country that has been put in the dock and the verdict has gone against it, if it's a strong country, it's a powerful country, then it can with the impunity cock a snook at whatever decision has come out of that. We've seen that in the case of the United States also when there were verdicts that have gone against it. But as far as Pakistan is concerned, I don't think it is that sort of a state which can sort of, completely deny and disown and disavow whatever the decision has come. I think there will be extreme pressure. That having been said, Frank, I am both disappointed and perplexed at the sort of responses that we have seen coming out of Pakistan, because they say it's a huge victory for themselves. I think this response, in my view, is quite bizarre and quite outlandish. And this really to me proves that Pakistan continues to be in denial of what the facts of the case are. Because if you look at not only the Indian media but the international media, whether it's New York Times, whether it's Guardian, whether it's any
Reuters,
of these,
BBC,
Reuters, every one of them has said that it is India's victory as far as the sentence is concerned. That has been put aside, and consular access. These were the basic demands. And if Pakistan says that we have won, why is it that the Pakistani judge ad hoc, Mr. Jilani, why did he not join all the decisions? All the 8-9 decisions that have been taken, they have been taken 15:1. That means there has been near consensus barring one. Only the Pakistan justice, representative on the ICJ, he is the only one who has presented a dissenting vote. All the others have gone along. Whether the ICJ has can take cognizance, does it have mandate over this? Was Pakistan wrong in not informing India? Was Pakistan wrong in not informing Jadhav about his rights? Was Pakistan wrong in denying consular access by saying that he's a spy? Was Pakistan wrong in saying that 2008 there was a bilateral agreement and that that superseded the Vienna Convention? On all these accounts, Pakistan's case has been rubbished. It has been rejected. And it is only Mr. Jilani who has stood against the 15 judges. So I think the fact that Pakistan says that we have won this victory, and Imran Khan says that, and the army chief says that it is February 27 again, this is a bravado, and which unfortunately tells me that going forward, it's not going to be very easy for India.
Absolutely.
I think the battle has just begun.
Sure.
And we should be prepared for sort of, not letting our eye off the ball and taking it forward in the most expeditious manner that
Absolutely.
we can.
So that having been said, KV Prasad, what options does India have if Pakistan does not heed to the verdict, or if Pakistan decides not to play ball?
No, I think the options will first have to be explored diplomatically. Of course, there is a legal route, as Mr. Salve did mention a little while ago. That is one aspect of it. As it is in the last few years, India has taken a lot of steps to bring immense pressure on Pakistan, especially the FATF is being a case in point, where India's role was very, may not just directly, but India had put its case very strongly, and so all these things. It's also the result of this diplomatic outreach that the kind of the pressure that keeps building up. Remember this case where the death sentence happened, all that, and India went to ICJ. It was just in the backdrop of Balakot. So it's not that India did. So India continued to do what it thought was right, and was not taken up by the domestic issues that were otherwise at that point of time going around. Before that, the Pulwama and Balakot, both things. So I think it's once the leadership is clear that come what may, we have to do this, the course has to be followed. And so far, everything has fallen in its place, which looks like with the verdict which came from The Hague yesterday.
All right, all right. So now this brings me to the question that I wanted to ask you earlier and put the point across earlier. Harshvipan, can Pakistan really defy the verdict of the ICJ? Is it in the position to do so, looking at its economic problems, looking at the kind of pressure that's been exerted by the United States and India and other nations as well?
It looks very unlikely, and I think some of the messages that Pakistan has been sending over the last few years have been positive. And so in that sense, the idea that that Pakistan would be able to defy such an important verdict and such a decisive verdict is difficult to contemplate at this point, despite all the pressures that the domestic politics would entail, and despite all the sort of civil military dynamic that plays on in Pakistan. But I think look at what is happening today. I mean, 5 days after Pakistan said there is no question of opening the airspace in India, it did a U-turn. Similarly, on Kartarpur negotiations, it has acceded to most of Indian demands. On Hafiz Saeed, after a lot of huffing and puffing and going hither and thither, finally they decided to arrest him, quote unquote, again, and put him in some sort of an incarceration. So I think what they are trying to signal is that perhaps given the sort of constraints that you point out, they are in no position to defy global opinion, which means that they want to normalize their status in the international order, which for a long time, because of a sustained diplomatic campaign that India had run over the last 5 years, has made Pakistan virtually marginal, almost isolated. And that is why this attempt to gradually move into the center stage. So as you see Mr. Khan going to Washington, there is a sense of transactionalism evident in the way they have proceeded. So one would expect that given their economic problems, given the fact that China did not come out as the kind of all-weather friend bailing them out of their financial crisis that many had assumed before, given the fact that American pressure continues despite the Afghan peace process, I think, and despite despite all this, you have India, which has continued to maintain a sustained pressure on Pakistan from all fronts: economic, political, diplomatic, and military. I think Pakistan, it seems to me, would be is now showing that it is not in a position to defy all of these constraints, and perhaps wants a political opening with India and with the international community. So it would be interesting to watch out the next few days as Mr. Khan goes to Washington, as they craft a message on Jadhav. I think we have to be careful in terms of what they do, but I think the crafting, the initial statements that have come out of Pakistan certainly are more tuned towards the domestic audience, because it's almost a catastrophic case of losing global face. And I think how do they, and I don't think any political entity would be in any different position if in this situation. But I think as they move forward and as they realize the costs that they would be incurring if they defy the ICJ, perhaps they would make an opening on the Jadhav case like they have done in other cases.
Absolutely.
That's the hope.
Okay. Closing comments now from all my guests with the best way forward, starting first with the ambassador. So do you see India tightening the screws further as far as Pakistan is concerned when it comes to diplomacy?
Yes, absolutely. I think we will need to be vigilant. I would like also, to concur with my other panelists that one can hope that Pakistan will see what is the right way and move forward on that. But then hope cannot be a substitute for policy. So while hoping for that, we have to be prepared. And while all these things, Kartarpur, airspace, etc., Hafiz Saeed, these are all positive measures. And keeping that in mind, I would have expected Pakistan to have been more moderate in its opposition and in its criticism of this decision. I agree that, for the domestic audience, it had to say something that we have been vindicated. But the sort of language that has been used at the top ranks, both the civilian leadership as well as the military leadership, that does not augur so well. And in that context, and it had a good way out, because it could have said that we are under tremendous international pressure. And many countries have used on earlier occasions the argument of international pressure to change their domestic policies and their domestic laws. So I think this was a great opportunity that has been presented to Pakistan to mend its ways and to sort of, reach out for a diplomatic settlement or diplomatic talks with India.
It's still not too late.
It is still not too late. Let us hope it moves in that direction. But if it doesn't, we have to sort of, be prepared to isolate Pakistan, particularly on the issue of terrorism. All the other things, because there are discussions going on Afghanistan with Taliban, this, that, there Pakistan has seemingly made itself indispensable, so to say. All those things aside, our focus has to be to isolate Pakistan on the issue of terrorism, so that we get satisfaction that Pakistan does not provide safe havens to terrorists and does not support terrorists.
Absolutely. KV Prasad, best way forward?
Yeah, I think India has already made it clear that it will keep the vigil up and is not going to let any let down. And one hopes that Pakistan also sees reason in this whole thing, because there is, of course, a domestic component which everybody has talked about. And don't forget that at the time when they released Wing Commander Abhinandan, there was a lot of domestic, if you hear the debates back in television, the retired generals, they kept on saying that, why did you give him away? So there is that element where these hardliners, as you may call them, so I think he'll have to find a way out. The Pakistani leadership, both civil and military, will have to find a way out as to how best to deal with the situation they are faced with. And India will have to, of course, remain vigilant till the end goal is reached.
Absolutely. And Harshvi Pant, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, I think Pakistan is facing almost an existential crisis at this point, and I think they recognize the challenge that the economic crisis is leading them towards, and they recognize the fact that the global isolation that that they face is accruing extreme costs on them. So clearly, I think that the challenge is being recognized, and therefore you see some small steps being taken towards India. But I think Indian policy on Pakistan seems to have been working pretty effectively, and I would hope that that policy continues. That while we don't want to be seen as giving in to Pakistani demands in some ways, there are bigger issues on the table, on the agenda. Mr. Jadhav's case is very difficult. It's very sad what has happened to him and what the way Pakistan has dealt with him. But I think if you look at the regional security environment, it's becoming complex by the day. And I think India will have to find a way of managing this transition at a time when Pakistan's crisis may also present us with an opportunity.
Absolutely. All right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.